The Penguin is one of Batman's oldest and most iconic foes. As such, the character has naturally been adapted for many other forms of Batman media outside of comics. Here is my list of the top 5 best adaptations of the foul-feathered fowl. Write down your own list in the comments. And let's get into it. Number 5. Batman Returns. Danny DeVito, of course, played Oswald Cobblepot in this live-action movie, the second and last Batman movie directed by Tim Burton. Now, Tim Burton famously didn't really like the Penguin very much, and it was the studio that essentially forced him to feature the villain. Burton didn't understand the character and couldn't grasp what it was all about. You have to keep in mind that this was before Oswald Cobblepot was reimagined as a mob boss in the comics. So Burton decided to reimagine the character himself. We thus got a Penguin quite unlike any other version, especially at the time. The Batman Returns Penguin is a grotesque monster, a former sideshow freak who lives in the sewers, hiding away from the society that shuns him. This was actually a great idea in my opinion. The Penguin has always been physically deformed, but never like this, and it's never really been the focus of the character either. Turning him into a sad, tragic freak who wants revenge on Gotham for mistreating him, well, that's simply pure genius. However, Burton and company kinda messed it up, which is why Batman Returns only ranks as my number 5. All the ingredients are there, but the movie makers didn't seem to recognize them. Instead, they made Oswald as monstrous as he looks. He's not really sad and tragic, he's a pure evil, foul-feathered bird of ill omen for real. A crude, vulgar monster who spouts bad jokes and wants to murder little babies. DeVito also take it way too over the top. It could have been great, and I'll always like the Batman Returns Penguin, partly because of the potential it had, and partly because of nostalgia, as this is a movie I grew up with. They also gave the character a great visual design and numerous cool gimmick umbrellas. The umbrellas are sadly something that's often neglected these days. Number 4. Gotham. Robin Lord Taylor played the Penguin in this live-action TV show. The show recently wrapped up after 5 seasons, and I'm assuming most of you have seen them all. I myself am still stuck at the end of season 2. If you're wondering why, well, it's simply because I'm not really a big fan of the series. I don't think it's necessarily terrible, but it is a badly written mess, and sometimes far too goofy for my tastes. We didn't need another campy Batman TV show, we already have one that's far superior too. A TV show with the tone and visual style of the Arkham games would have been great, and with Batman actually in it. Anyway, I digress. Despite being a villain, the Penguin is one of the main characters on the show, and I'd argue the breakout star. Back when I used to watch Gotham, I was far more interested in Cobblepot's wacky escapades than whatever boring shit Jim Gordon was doing. The Penguin was for me the real star of the show, and I suspect many others feel the same. He was a complicated rogue, not quite an evil villain, yet certainly not a hero either. This was also a much younger Oswald, basically the Penguin starting out, and the show details his rise from lowly henchman to king of Gotham City, something we really haven't seen before, not even in the comics, so that was interesting. Taylor portrays him terrifically too, giving the character an unhinged edge, which he usually doesn't feature. I wouldn't say this Pengy is outright insane, but he certainly is a bit more disturbed than usual. Of course, considering I've only seen about 2 seasons, I can't quite fairly judge this version. After all, I have no idea what they do with him in the other 3 seasons. They might completely ruin him, or make him even better, I have no clue. So I'm putting him on the safe spot of number 4. Number 3. The Arkham games. Nolan North supplied the voice for the Penguin in this series of highly successful Batman video games. The Penguin appeared in all of them, except for the very first one, and is definitely one of the series' most memorable villains. The Arkham version of Pengy is based on a modern take on a character from the comics, the mob boss Penguin, and that is what Oswald is in the games, a gangster. However, the game creators decided to put their own spin on the character as well. As opposed to being a stylish and sophisticated gentleman of crime, Arkham Pengy is a grimy thug. He's also portrayed as being British, speaking with a heavy Cockney accent, like some hoodlum from out of London's East End. Now, I call him a thug and a hoodlum, but that doesn't mean he's not a criminal mastermind. He sure is, leading a vast criminal empire. Like people always say, this is basically a Guy Ritchie take on the Penguin, and also one of the more realistic takes. I would also say it's one of the most fun takes, and that is probably a lot due to Nolan North's very entertaining voice performance. He really sells the whole nasty, gritty gangster bit. The Arkham version is definitely a very inspired and unique interpretation of the Penguin, but one that also stays true to the basic core of the character, at least mostly. I do feel the broken beer bottle stuck in his eye is really silly though. They wanted to do a darker take on his iconic monocle, but just ended up making it goofier. Number 2. The 60s TV show. The Penguin was of course played by Burgess Meredith on this live-action TV show, the show that made both Batman and the Penguin into pop culture icons. Old Pengy definitely owes a lot to Meredith and the show. This series also features perhaps the most comic-accurate take on the Penguin ever. Not accurate to the modern version of course, but accurate to the Penguin we had in the comics back then. The bird of ill omen of this show is an arrogant, pompous master thief, a colorful criminal genius who lives to trick Batman with convoluted and outlandish capers, just like the pre-1990s comics Pengy. Visually, he's also ripped straight off the page of a Silver Age comic, and throughout the show, Pengy utilized numerous trick umbrellas. For a Penguin adaptation, he doesn't get a whole lot better than this. Of course, I can understand that some don't like it. If you don't like the classic pre-90s Oswald, you're obviously not a fan of this version. Me, I generally prefer the old Pengy, so naturally, I love this take. Pengy is in fact one of my favorite villains on the show, and I definitely find him the most entertaining. This is of course due to Meredith's iconic and hilarious performance. Like I've mentioned in the past, I love all those grimaces he makes and how he chews on that oversized cigarette holder. His voice and wah laugh is also perfect. And now for my favorite adaptation of The Bird of Prey. And this was not an easy choice. Number 1. The animated series. Pengy was voiced by Paul Williams on his classic cartoon show. When I say the animated series, I do mean the animated series only, not the last season, also known as the New Batman Adventures. Like many villains, Penguin was very different on that season, and while I do like that take as well, it's certainly not my number 1. No, we're talking classic Taz Pengy here, the one that looked like a freak. So when the show started, Batman Returns was also in production. The studio thus forced the animators to make Oswald look similar to the Danny DeVito movie version. They didn't go quite as far as the movie did, but it's still a pretty freakish penguin unlike it ever been in the comics at the time. The show's creators didn't want to do this. They wanted a traditional design, which is what they did end up doing for the New Adventures, when Batman Returns was old news. I used to agree with the creators and wanted a traditional looking Pengy too, but not any longer. Over the last few years, I've come to appreciate the animated series Ozzy a lot more. Yes, it is true, he was often misused on the show. Most Penguin episodes cast him as a generic villain, roles any rogue on the show could have filled. But we did of course also get Birds of a Feather, one of the greatest episodes of the show and certainly the best villain reform episode, which, considering how many of those they made, is not a small boast. He also appeared in a few villain ensemble episodes where he was great. And even if the episode he did appear in wasn't the best, Pengy himself was still portrayed really well. Unlike the New Adventures, which adapted the then new mob boss take, Taz went with the classic version, the outlandish Master Thief. This was of course combined with a freaky looking penguin, a perfect blend for me, as over the years I've grown more interested in Oswald's physical deformities and the stories you can tell with that. For instance, I don't feel Birds of a Feather would have worked quite as well with the New Adventures Pengy, while it's a scenario perfectly suited the animated series Penguin. In a way, this version did what Batman Returns failed, a good take on a freakish Oswald. Still, I do wish more episodes had explore these themes and the character himself. Nevertheless, I do feel I have to place the animated series version as my number 1 adaptation of the Penguin. It wasn't always used to its full potential, but it was nonetheless pretty damn great. Paul Williams' voice is also the one I usually hear when I read Penguin comics. So there you have it. I'm back, and these are my top 5 adaptations of The Bird of Prey. Write down yours in the comments. Next up in this series is the feline fatale herself, Selina Kyle, aka the Catwoman. When that video will be up, I don't quite know. Like I've said, I don't feel like churning out videos like I did in the old days. Plus, I have an entire asylum to run too. It's called Hillbrook if you hadn't heard, and it's full of crazy people who need my attention. I guess we'll just see when Kitty appears, and until then you can can always pay a visit to Hillbrook. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum and Hillbrook awaits you in the next video.